Hi everyone, I'd like to officially welcome you to MENA's Big Tech Boom. My name is Rida Shah. I'm the Operations Manager at Sarabit Gateway. I have a wonderful panel here with me. We're going to be talking about the tech boom that we have going on at the moment and the skills that we have available within the region. So I'm going to start off by just kind of jumping into the topic. We can see quite a lot of companies jumping into their digital strategy, expanding quite rapidly within the region, Tarabit Gateway being one of them. During our expansion, we've kind of found it's an interesting journey to see how we're attracting, tech talent within the region, the kind of individuals we attract. And I think the reason we chose this topic was to see what people from different backgrounds and different experiences can bring to the table to kind of have this discussion. Now, regardless of what's been happening, we feel like there's quite a lot of chatter within the region that there's not enough talent within the MENA, within the GCC. And that's what we wanted to bring to the table to discuss. So I'm going to start by introducing our brilliant panel. I'll start by Pakiza Abdurrahman, who I don't think is a stranger to anyone within the startup arena. Pakiza is the Manager of Technology and Innovation at Bahrain Economic Development Board. Lina Ashkar, who is a Senior Associate at Propeller in Jordan, and Abdullah Al-Mukail, who is the co-founder of Rain, a crypto asset company based here in Bahrain. So welcome, guys. Very excited to have you on board, and very interested to see the different thought processes that are going to go on in this discussion. So before we jump into the main topic that I discussed, I wanted to kind of bring on board, while we were discussing this topic, a theme that popped up was fintech talent versus tech talent. Is there an actual difference between the two? Is there such a thing as fintech talent? Because if you notice, being such a new area within the region, that people are quite hesitant to jump into it because they have preconceived notions, they have thoughts that they might not be able to fit in. So what are your kind of thoughts on that? What do you see? Do you actually see a difference between the two? Pakiza, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rida, for hosting this important session, and a warm welcome to all the viewers with us here today. I recall debating this and discussing a lot the difference and the similarities between fintech talents and tech talents in general. While I see a lot of similarities in the skills that you sort of absorb and learn, the differentiation comes in the application that is relevant to the industry you're operating in. So while I believe that the skill itself is the same, it's a learning experience of machine learning, artificial intelligence, coding, developing solutions, platforms, etc. But what's most important for you to be considered having the fintech talent is the application and the industry awareness to apply those skills in the right manner, in the most appropriate platform and methodology.
Absolutely. Lean?
Yeah, perfect. There's not much for me to add to Pakiza. That's a very clear distinction. And the way I like to just look at it is like within any startup, regardless of the domain, you've got the domain expertise, which in this case is the financial sector. And that's where you want to be aware about the fintech regulations and the domain expertise on that end. And then on the other side, you've got the tech talent as in software engineers, which is developing the technology solutions. And of course, there is overlap between the two, because sometimes if you're building something that's very specific and you need to understand, there's a financial aspect to the product, and you might need to look for talent that might come from financial background. The tech talent might need to have that domain expertise, but I would say in most cases, you're just looking for really skilled software engineers that are willing to learn the new industry and domain And that's, I guess, where you end up with the fintech talent overlapping both.
Absolutely. There's also quite a lot of, I think, people being afraid to kind of jump into it, assuming that fintech and tech is quite correlated. Abdullah, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean it's correlated, but the main problem I see is probably focused on senior engineers in the space. But to make a fintech company, and fintech can be just a business model, or that's the theme for the entire company, you need talent in all different areas and not just engineers. Engineers or developers themselves don't make the company by themselves. There's definitely a lot of industry knowledge that someone could acquire and not know how to code and become a very valuable member of a fintech company. And so that's where I see the fintech talent and tech talent is difference is usually when people reference tech talent, at least in my perspective, is it's always been about the developers themselves. But when I've heard about fintech talent or fintech talent pool or potential employees, I've seen a lot of good prospects in Bahrain and the GCC locally that we hired many of them in our company.
Great. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on that, Abdullah. I'll throw a general question at you guys, and then we can start our discussion. So what do you think, based on your experiences and your perspective, what are the challenges that can hinder the growth of this tech skills and tech industry within the region?
In specific order? Yeah, I can go for it. Yeah, so as a VC, part of the things that we do to add value to our portfolio companies. So we have invested in 14 companies so far. Most are in Jordan, but we do have a few investments across the region, and that has given us insight onto the talent pool because we help our portfolio companies in recruiting talent. And that statement is very interesting to dig into because we've been giving this a lot of thought over the past 3 years. And what we've seen specifically in Jordan, I would say, is there isn't that much of a shortage in talent at the junior level. So we in Jordan, and I'm sure the same thing applies in Egypt, have a lot of fresh graduates in computer science, software engineering. There are a lot of programs available that will help people get into that domain. But what we see a shortage in is at the intermediate and senior level, there aren't that many qualified tech talents at that stage. And I'm mostly referring to software engineers here. So the question ends up being, so what's happening, right? If we start with a very big pool, why do we have that few qualified senior talent? And from what we've seen, one thing that stands out is we can generalize in some way that there's a somewhat slow career development progression for employees to just become better at what they do. You've got companies like Careem, like Talabat, like Expedia that really pushed and put a huge pool of really qualified talent back into the market. But then what's happening at all the other tech companies, that's where we need to look deeper to see how can we push employee progression so that the junior pool can all become super qualified senior talent. So that's one thing that stands out. And another common thing that we've seen, this is mostly on the startup side, is there aren't that many technical co-founders that take the risk to start their own company. Most founders come from business backgrounds, specific industry domain backgrounds. So if we are here to build a tech hub out of the MENA, it's all about building technology products. You need more technical co-founders. I'm not sure what's causing that hindrance and why aren't there that many people making that move. I'm sure there are many reasons for that, but we definitely need more technical co-founders teaming up with business founders to build sustainable technology companies.
Absolutely echo what Leen has mentioned, and if I may add a couple of notes, Rida, on what we've noticed in the tech talents here in the region. While the gap between the industry and the graduates is shrinking through the initiatives that the public sector and the private sector, thankfully, are putting together. Here in Bahrain, I've seen some examples of programs that bridge that gap. So the recent announcement by WEF and the Economic Development Board to launch the Skills Gap Accelerator, a program that brings in multi-stakeholders from Bahrain to put forward a strategy in bridging the skills gap and making sure that we focus the policies of universities to focus on the employability of the graduates. And by saying that, what we're also focusing on is that not only do they graduate with the right skills, but they are ready with the right industry awareness and sort of practicality skills as well in applying and adapting to the emerging trends that is ever changing in our world, right? So 4 years is just a long time of grasping and getting information. During those 4 years, we're introducing programs for graduates for students to apply the learnings, to skill and reskill along the way, so that once they are out of the university, they can either run their own company. They have the skills ready to apply it in any job they may see fit. What we've also looked at is the policy at universities for IP creation and patents and trademarks, right? We've noticed that a lot of students don't register their graduation projects or any of the projects that they do and the research that is happening in university. And we've identified a couple of amendments in the regulation, in the policies, and these are now put in place to sort of provide an opportunity for the researchers and the students to commercialize their IP. These are a couple of instances that are being put in place to overcome these challenges of the readiness of the graduates. I look at the reskilling, which is another sort of challenge, is that people who have been spending a few years in the market, there's a large amount of reskilling that needs to be put in place to adapt to the latest technologies, right? So who does that? Who needs to push that agenda forward? Is it the public sector or is it the corporate sector? Is it the HR teams at the organizations that should pump in and invest in human resources? Or is it organizations like Tamkeen, for example, in Bahrain, the Labor Fund, that puts forward programs and incentivize the corporate sector to reskill the labor market? So these are all questions that are on the table. Of course, COVID accelerated those discussions and put a huge emphasis on the importance of human capital development and making sure that our people have the right skills for the future jobs.
Absolutely, I completely agree with every statement that you just made, Pakiza. And I think going down into this discussion, we'll kind of figure out, is it something universities are doing at the moment, or is it something that, as you rightly said, with the EDB focusing on it now, how is that going to work with universities? How are students going to be encouraged to kind of jump into this pool? So we'll look into that in a little bit more detail. Abdullah, do you have any thoughts to kind of give into this with your, with the recruitment going on at Rain, with the expansion that you guys have been going through? What's your experience been like?
So for our experience, it's definitely been a challenge to find local talent in software engineers, senior software engineers, but we were able to find them. Sometimes you just, it's just a matter of a market, right? Some companies are not willing to give a higher than average salary offers to some of the talent that exists. So it appears that they don't exist because they're just not matching the price that they require, and they're scarce. They're and there's, as Lean mentioned, there's a lack of technical co-founders. But on the positive side, the growth in the entrepreneurship ecosystem here has been incredible, because it also we see the growth of venture capital, and we see people like Lean and Propeller investing in companies and helping them grow. That encourages people to experiment, to try out new things and develop a lot of skills, because it encourages people with software engineering talent to take risks, to start out their own project, and that in itself kind of helps other people learn in the ecosystem, and they all flourish together. Other success stories from this are reintroducing talent, like you said. We see Kareem, when they laid off something like 30% of their employees. In the past, due to COVID, all of that talent went to other startup ecosystems. This is something we've done as well. We see the big winners, what they have been doing, and the more startups and entrepreneurs that exist, the more talent that will flourish. It's just a little lagging, because it's easier to support the entrepreneurship ecosystem and venture capital to grow faster than the talent itself.
Absolutely. Sorry,
I'd like to jump in to ask Mohammed Abdullah a question, if I may.
Absolutely.
Where did you find your tech talent? Where did you hire from? Is that something you can share?
Yeah, definitely. Lean touched on this a little bit in terms of saying that Jordan and Egypt had sufficient medium level engineers, and that's true. But for the GCC, it's not as much. You can say that Jordan and Egypt has more talent. So we have interviewed a lot of people from Jordan, and also we have engineers and contractors in Egypt. But we also have some from Saudi in Bahrain. And we have our tech team is kind of distributed as well. We have a US team, so a lot of our engineers are also in the US. But we are constantly looking for local talent in Bahrain, in Saudi, in UAE, and we're hiring them more and more people from the UAE and Bahrain in the coming year.
So I just want to build on that, Abdullah. With your team being kind of divided between the US and the GCC or the MENA region, is there any gap that you feel within the talent, and is there a way that you're bridging that? Is there, with helping the talent here locally?
So I think there is a gap, and the gap exists honestly everywhere in the world. The tech industry is booming everywhere, and there's always more demand for software engineering and engineers in general than anywhere before. The good news is people now have more resources than ever before to try to self-educate and learn online. But unfortunately, I don't think we can completely depend on the universities, because even everywhere else around the world, it's just a matter of numbers. You see China and India, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of graduates. And if there's a small fraction of them are ready for the market, that's still a huge talent pool. But for us, not enough graduates. And then the actual factor itself is some of them are not enough to get into the ecosystem early on. So we kind of look for people that have tried to build things on their own. They have tried to educate themselves, or have tried to experiment on projects and other startups, and have not, even if it has not been successful at all. That shows initiative and experimentation and ingenuity, and that's the kind of people we seek here.
Brilliant. Pakiza, I'm going to jump into a little bit about what you're doing with startups, and understand, how do you think, what are the resources that are available to Bahraini startups? So, you're working with startups here locally, you're working with entrepreneurs here. How do you see the process kind of going with recruitment, with hiring specifically for tech or within fintech? And what are the resources that are available to these startups? Do you feel like there's, even within the age group, do you feel like there is more talent within, maybe fresh graduates, as Lean said, you find a huge pool of juniors and maybe some mids, and then it goes down like a triangle? Or is it, more towards people looking to switch their career? Do you find that more often?
Thank you for the question, Rida. But allow me to just highlight maybe a couple of facts from the job market here in Bahrain. So Bahrain ranks first in the Human Capital Index in the MENA region by World Bank. Having said that, the workforce in the country is highly educated, bilingual by nature, and there is a strong tech-focused workforce that is 35% of them being Bahraini. So the rest is expats. There are around 900 plus yearly graduates from ICT courses in the country, with 60% of the workforce being from the early age bracket, the 18 to 24 years old. The number has been significantly increasing over the past few years. There is more interest, awareness, and culture openness to learning the tech programs in different universities. There has been a huge focus on building sort of the corporate innovation labs at universities, empowered by many of the international corporates that are based here in Bahrain, to ensure that the graduates graduate with certifications, globally recognized certifications, so that they are more employable in the future. What I think the challenges are, or the opportunities that are put forward for these startups and for the graduates, is through working together. Collaboration is key, and being part of an integral part of a shared economy globally is extremely important, and we should definitely all leverage on that. So something we've launched in 2016 was an amplification of what was built by the community, sort of a coalition of like-minded people, whether they're from academia, from regulators, incubators and accelerators, and a few of the startups, of the early startups that were shaping the economy here in the country. We sat together and discussed few sort of initiatives that could amplify and build bridges between the different stakeholders. And that resulted into many interesting programs that fuel the awareness and understanding and the applicability. Sorry, this was the wrong choice of words. It helps graduates apply the learnings of their studies at startups. So accelerators were welcoming local and international startups in their programs. They were reaching out to universities to bring in and matchmake them with a few of their interns, a few of their graduates to intern at those startups, giving them hands-on experience in building and developing front end, back end, and full stack, of course. And then moving on to getting the experience of pitching in front of a regulator for policy reforms, pitching in front of an investor for funding, etc. So they were able to grasp all the non-technical skills that a university could sort of expose you to. So overall, that kind of collaboration brought in great opportunities and still serve as great resources for the startups and for entrepreneurs to matchmake and to support. Of course, there are programs like Temkin's International Placement Program that was very active in the past, that funded Bahrainis traveling abroad and getting the necessary skills. You've got institutions like BIBF that are not only focusing on courses and certifications in the financial industry, but also leveraging on the digital transformation aspects of the real estate industry, for example, and different sort of programs that are with Bahrain's digital economy's agenda.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that. Thank you for shedding light on that, Pakiza. Before we kind of jump into the rest of the questions, I want to leave the floor open for the audience. Please do leave your questions if you do have any, either for myself or any of the panelists, and we'll be addressing them closer towards the end. And if you want to reach out personally for any, any kind of guidance as well, feel free to leave a note and we will reach out to you. Lean, I want to jump into a little bit of what you're doing at the moment with Propeller, and working with startups to kind of help their recruitment operation, setting up of their teams, and things like that. Do you have any thoughts on what the talent pool is like, when you're kind of helping out with these startups, and what are their experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, as you mentioned, we've been helping our portfolio companies hire for the past couple of years and looking at the pool in Jordan, but also for remote talent or for teams that are based out of Jordan, right? And one thing that kind of stands out, as I mentioned earlier, it's more of like a gap at the intermediate and senior level. And as Pakiza mentioned, there's a lot of room for reskilling and upskilling, right? These initiatives are all in place. But so for example, Expedia set up offices in Jordan a couple of years back, and they've hired around 100 or 200 software engineers. So it's a pure tech hub based out of Amman. And the quality of talent that came out of Expedia and the impact that that had on the ecosystem in Jordan was profound, right? Same thing is happening in Karim across the GCC. So what this tells you is the culture and the culture of transparency, collaboration, the employee progression, making sure every employee at the company is working and getting a lot of mentorship and is getting better at what they do. So that sort of progression is super important. And this is what's kind of, I would say, lacking in a lot of companies, be it at corporates or startups. There isn't this very strong focus on culture, and employees want that as well. Like even if you're new to the job, you want to feel you've got a good support system that's there to help you become better at what you do. So overall, we're trying to put a very strong emphasis on culture, collaboration. I've recently spoken to a director of product management at Talabat, and they're going through a huge restructuring, culture transformation, transitioning the company more towards a tech company, product company, where even the structure of the team is super critical. If you've got engineers working with product managers and designers, that sort of like collaborative squad brings out a lot of ideas and a lot of interesting opportunities for the company, and the company actually sees better results and better products are being built. So in terms of the structure of the teams within organizations, the focus on employee progression, transparency, working with also like Expedia, their impact was great because all of the team in Jordan was working with the team abroad, like all over the globe. So you're setting the bar high, just as Abdullah mentioned. If he has part of his team based out of the US, working with the talent across the region, that sort of like sharing of knowledge across borders is just going to lift the whole talent pool. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. That was a bit broad, but there's a lot for us all to do, right? From culture to startups to corporates. And of course, Abdullah touched up on this, and this is super important. It's the work that the individual puts in as well. There's so many resources available online. There's so much to learn. There are a lot of open source projects that you can be a part of just to practice, right? And even this is one statistics that we find super interesting. If you go on GitHub, which is where most of the code is being written, and you look at the countries, the top ranked countries for open source projects, none of the Middle Eastern countries are within that list. But what this tells you is that software engineers in these countries are actually spending their free time to even code. So they're learning outside of the office. They're spending more of their free time honing their skills and getting better at what they do. So that sense of personal development of, okay, I want to be better at what I do. I want to read more. I want to learn more. That we need to instill that mindset as leaders at companies and VCs and across all ecosystem stakeholders, really.
I completely agree. I kind of want to put this on both Pakiza and Abdullah from a Bahrain standpoint. I know Tarabat is working really hard towards this. And as Lean touched upon culture within an organization. I think that's, that plays a huge part nowadays within startups. And it is very different to what we see within corporates and larger organizations that have already been established. So is that, Pakiza, from your kind of experience, and Abdullah, with Rain as well, do you guys see that as something that's developing within Bahrain as well? Is culture being given that much of an importance, and, helping employees kind of progress in when they do come into that specific role? Or do you see like it going pretty normal, like everyone kind of stays stagnant? What are your kind of thoughts on that?
Culture, such a big word and such an interesting one as well. My personal favorite. So I consider myself a community developer. So I work very closely with startups and with different stakeholders to ensure that we have a common vision where we see success and we know what we need to do to develop and to deliver success for the country's economic vision. When we talk about culture, the two elements that aren't yet activated the way I would aspire to have in Bahrain is the local media, the local attention from media on the tech talents in the country. So you tend to sort of we tend to invite the local media to attend some of the demo days, for example, of the accelerators. They've been doing a great job, but what we'd love to see, for example, more on showcasing the developers, the local developers that have earned a great success due to their skills, and they are being reached by different sort of platforms and countries abroad to hire and to work with them. There has been a great sort of movement earlier. Sorry for the noise. A huge movement in the communities, the tech communities in the country. I say, for example, the Google Developer Group, for example, they have been relentlessly trying to upskill, and promote, like Lean mentioned, promotion of the skill is extremely important. Where are you reachable? Where can we find you? If we want to hire you, where can I find you? What we've noticed is that LinkedIn and different sort of platforms wasn't a true reflection of the skills that are available in Bahrain. So we did our bit as EDB. Whenever we have investors, we'd handhold them and take them to visits to the universities. We take them to visits to platforms like Injaz, Google Developer Group sessions, and the accelerators, and some of the large companies in Bahrain that are hiring local talent, to just put them in front of those entities and have them share that success story. When we talk about culture, we talk about parents as well and family. We notice that they have a significant impact on the students, on the pipeline, right, of talent. When it starts from high school, moving into university, and graduating into the jobs that we aspire to have more of in the country. So how do you tackle the culture of on that element? So we opened up a lot of sessions, included sort of the family offices and the potential angel investors in those discussions and in those workshops to emphasize the importance of tech skills in the country.
Great.
Thank
you so much, Pakiza. Thank you for kind of for breaking that down so well. Abdullah, this was a question that actually came in from somebody as well, and something that I wanted to touch upon with you. What do you think are the growing kind of tech roles within this industry? You've been in touch, obviously, with various companies as well. You've spoken to so many candidates. What do you think is the growing demand, role, skills within tech?
Well, I can speak on behalf of our company. The demand we're looking for customer experience agents, and we're looking for operations associates. We're looking for people all over the place to be part of our tech company, or fintech company, but not just engineers. And we're finding a lot of people that are really good. And I think maybe there's, to touch back on the culture and the difference between maybe corporate and startups, is we do see sometimes some hesitation to join a startup because it's maybe people think, oh, I want stability, or I don't know about if this company is going to last. But joining a startup could be extremely rewarding experience on self-development point of view versus a corporate company or some bigger corporation. Because in a startup, it's possible, it's not impossible to get promoted 3 times in 1 year, just because the startup is growing so fast that everyone now has to take on a new role, and we have to accommodate customers or something of that sort. So startups grow much faster, and that's their intention, and that's the objective. But corporates kind of have a lot of bureaucracy that is sometimes harder to move up in a ladder. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but I see that the trend is going towards, with more success stories as we see, like the Kareem exit and other ones, we're going to see more risk takers and more people that value what it's like working in a startup. We certainly do. If you worked at a startup, that's a big plus for us. We don't care what it is. You tried something, you probably took on multiple hats, and you gained a lot of wide skills doing that. So I think that's, and seeing that entrepreneurship itself become part of the culture is really encouraging. So I think we're going to see a lot more people pop up in the coming years.
Absolutely. What do you guys think is the main difference between hiring for a startup versus that for a large corporate? Lean, I'd love to start with you because I know this is something that you guys kind of do quite often. Do you see a huge difference? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. As Abdullah just mentioned, right, when you're at the early days of a startup, especially when the team is still small, you're wearing multiple hats, and you want to see that personality within the individual, right? You have to be open to not just doing a job description, but going like point by point. You're gonna have to like probably one day be a UX designer and the other day have to be a sales agent, right? Especially at the early days. So that flexibility, that open-mindedness, that you're also a risk taker in a way, especially once you join super early. And of course, the startup has to properly incentivize that individual, like ESOP, employee stock option pool, is a huge way of doing this and giving them skin in the game. So I feel like early days of a startup, there's a certain like personality or trait that you want to look for, that excitement. They need to believe in the vision of the company as well, right? Because you're going to be hustling. There's so much to do all the time. It's super intensive. And hiring people for their passion, for the passion that they have towards the problem you're solving or the vision of the company is a huge plus. These are things that we particularly look for when helping our portfolio companies hire. I haven't done much support on the corporate side, but I'm assuming, if it's a much more structured organization where your role might be a bit more limited, then certain soft skills or that sort of passion might not be as important. But yeah, like vision, believing in that, you obviously have to incentivize them for that, give them the right culture, the right environment for them to actually like prosper and flourish. Yeah, I guess that's it. I'm not sure if you guys have anything to add.
No, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. Having worked at a larger organization, and while I went through that recruitment process, I remember it being very kind of strenuous, very, just long, and there is somewhat of a focus on maybe passion and culture, but not as extreme when it comes to a startup, for the exact same reason that you said, Lean, because an individual wears multiple hats. I know at Tarabat, when a majority of us had kind of joined and we thought, okay, this is our job, this is our role. I think anyone and everyone can tell you in the company that they did like 20 other things that added, it adds great value, I think, to an individual. And that itself, I think, fintech being, the industry that's growing and kind of growth happening within that. I think that should encourage individuals to apply themselves. Do you have anything to add to that, Pakiza?
I agree completely with what was said, and coming from sort of a semi-government agency, and prior to that, I did work for a telecom organization. In both instances, I felt that I had worked for a startup, in the sense of, to me, having a startup or being in the startup community is more of a culture that you take from, right? And you learn. You learn being fast. You learn being adaptable. You learn being flexible and extremely able to deal with complexity and uncertainty. So these are the sort of the attributes that makes that from what you've mentioned differentiates working for a large corporate and a startup, right? In both of my experiences in the past, the departments I've been in, or the nature of the operation of the team that I've been assigned to, has given me that sort of experience, which honestly is extremely satisfying to the soul, because you need to, like, what I enjoyed the most personally is that you're always on the search for a market product fit. You're always looking for new ways to adapt and to develop and to leverage on whatever skills your collective community is providing to you. So all in that sense, even when I worked for a large corporate, I really felt that energy. Yes, I'm a bit jealous of the startups, but definitely it's a state of mind, and it's definitely the perseverance, the resilience, and the tenacity that the startups have that make it enjoyable and extremely compelling and satisfying from a personal pace.
That's the exact personality I was talking about.
Right? Yeah.
That's that excitement. Yeah.
And I really hope that all large companies nowadays adapt this mentality. So we're not asking them to break down their companies and like start sort of considering themselves a smaller sort of agile companies, but start having that mentality. And large corporates should be able to be ready for change, unlearn. And this is the most important, this is the most difficult, yet most important point, that startups get it on the easily, but the larger corporations don't, is that we need to unlearn what we learned. And we need to start adopting and adapting to the new changes and the emerging technologies, impact and sort of considerations that our economy is going through. We're no longer doing what we used to do and what we are comfortable doing, whether it's your basic lifestyle routine. We shop differently now, we commute differently, we communicate differently, and all large corporations in all industries should adapt to this change. We're hiring millennials. Millennials don't usually, they're very unique in the way that they can be retained and sort of nurtured. So what are we really doing, and how can we be open for this kind of wave of cultural and generation of talent? So the times are interesting for us.
Very interesting. And I think I agree massively with the retention of talent. I think Abdullah was the one who touched upon it, that people find it quite a risk to jump into a startup, because it might not be that secure. It might be short term, not long term. So one thing that I kind of want to get into is retention of talent. We have a great question by an individual here, so I'm just going to read it out. One of the challenges for talent in the MENA region is a lack of structured mentorship. And I think that plays into retention massively as well. When you have an amazing mentor, when you have somebody there that you can lean on, you're bound to stay within that organization, within that environment, because again, it adds to the culture, it adds to the growth, it adds to all those various factors. What do you guys think of that? The lack of structured mentorship within the startup region. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, if I may. Yeah, I think this goes back to it's twofold, right? So first of all, is that mentor available within your organization? As we just mentioned, we spent some time on this culture. You want a leader that you can lean to, you can go back to with, and be super like transparent with, tell them about your fears or whatever it is, but just like really opening up and having that relationship so that they serve more as a mentor, they can guide you and not just as your manager. So if that's not within your organization, I think there's a lot that one can do to find them outside your work, and that there are a lot of like meetup groups that are coming up. There's a lot of community initiatives being done in each country across the region. Bahrain, as Kisa just mentioned, there's a lot going on. ETB, Jordan, we've been coming across a lot of like meetup groups. Even if it's like 10, 15 people, that might even be a more intimate environment for these people to bond and get to know each other and form that support system. And we've seen this. So we've organized a couple of meetups in Jordan for product managers and for software engineers. And it turns into kind of like a therapy session at the end of it, to be very honest, right? So we decide that we want to discuss a specific topic in product management, for example, and it goes into like, how did you deal with this issue with your manager? How did you convince them to change? And how did you impose influence, especially when engineers and product managers might not see eye to eye with the top management, and it becomes more of influence and what's your role in guiding the product in the right direction. So finding that support system, people that are going through similar challenges, even if they're not way ahead of you in terms of like career, but in terms of people at the same level can have so much to add to each other. There's a lot to share, a lot of value, a lot of knowledge exchange to do. So look for small communities, for meetup events, for conferences that where you'll be able to find like-minded individuals and get to know them, right? Like you're going to have to be a bit more proactive if that's not within your organization, but I'm sure it's going to open up a lot of doors.
Absolutely. So do you agree, Pakiza, it doesn't necessarily have to be within the organization? It could be at a larger scale.
Absolutely. And not only even in your own country, but you can also apply and get the support from mentors all over the world. And this is the beauty of the startup ecosystem, is that it has no boundaries. And at the EDB, we work very closely with different startup ecosystems globally to ink down a couple of formal MOUs to support startups at both countries. But really what we enjoy the most is to have these kind of collaborations between different markets and different expertise. Because as you mentioned, the startup ecosystem in our region is fairly recent and nascent. We haven't had the volume of exits that other markets and developed markets have had. Therefore, structured mentorship with the right talent of exiting, for example, is not that accessible to the startups in our region. So therefore, cross-border collaboration, in my opinion, has been successful. I know a couple of companies that reached out to other mentors across the different continents, and they were extremely helpful. And literally with a WhatsApp message and a video call, collaborations and support was provided.
Brilliant. Abdullah, what are your thoughts? I completely agree. Mentorship shouldn't be kind of bound within an organization, but I also feel like it is something important to keep individuals from, there are numerous ways to retain the right kind of tech talent or talent in general within a startup and within fintech. What are your thoughts on retention and mentorship within an organization, startups in specific?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important, but it goes back to the culture of the startup. and whether you're a corporate trying to incorporate this culture or not, or whether you're a startup, you have to the startup has to maintain a very positive and encouraging culture, and it has to also push for the idea of ownership of when you own a task or own a responsibility, then you can come forward if you make a mistake and say, "Hey, I made this mistake," and you can focus on the solutions and move forward. When you have a culture that there's fear or there's hesitation or fear of punishment, you can't have the mentorship relationship dynamic, because the person is going to think, oh, they're going to punish me for this, or they're going to take away from my salary, and then the management never hears about the problems, and this this ecosystem doesn't flourish in the startup. So it's really important to be to adopt a lot of what a lot of other people around the world have already learned, and kind of educated themselves around how to foster a good culture in a company that enables things like internal mentorship in the company.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Abdullah. Now, before I kind of wrap it up, I wanted to take one more question. It's obviously free to anyone who'd like to get onto this. How do we make the MENA employment landscape more competitive and hungry? It's quite an interesting question.
Yeah. Where do we start?
Go ahead. Sorry, Abdullah, did you have something to say?
Okay, I think it's a tough question. But if you can make it more hungry if people see why they should, the results basically. And I'm not talking about exits, because I think by the time there's a lot of exits, a lot of people have missed many opportunities then. So I think this can happen with a good amount of sharing of experiences and good storytelling on, and maybe some kind of literature created for the stories of the difficulties and the challenges that startups go through, and also the success stories are going to be very encouraging. So I think so long as the momentum and I guess the momentum in growing the startup ecosystem is maintained, and the venture capital will be able to detect good opportunities in the market that will lead to success stories and make people hungry for this. And I think one thing is that a lot of people can very well inspire themselves just today from the internet, and see a lot of what's happening around the world and try to mimic it, even if it's, and some people frown upon stuff like that, but I think it's one of the best things you could do. Just like any artist tries to learn by replicating their whoever they love, and try to learn what they're doing. So I think this is something that could encourage people and make them more hungry.
I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what I wanted to say. And if I may add to that, Abdullah, yeah, first thing is like definitely if you see more success stories coming out of the region, and they don't need to be exits as you mentioned, but if you come across like more products that are of global standards, right? So if you use the Kareem Talabat, a lot of these apps where you're like, oh wow, this was made in Jordan, or this was made in Bahrain, that by itself, I believe, is going to excite people, and you want to be part of that transition, especially since the MENA region, as Pakiza said, like startup scene is quite nascent, but it's also at the verge of like growing a lot. So any sort of like product that you come across that excites you, and more technology we produce, I guess it's just going to kind of amplify that whole thing. And knowledge sharing is a huge part of it. And I'm very happy to see more of that happening across the region. There's definitely room for much more of that. But for example, we just started a podcast called Let's Talk Product, where we host startup founders, product leaders to share their journey about building products, even the smallest details of building products, to kind of like the how I built this story. And we recently interviewed Tony from Talabat, the director of product management, and he was just saying the same thing, how even at Talabat, they just started a blog where once a week they're sharing how they build products. It's blog.talabat, I believe. And they're sharing how they work and how they're building product from the perspective of data, from perspective of engineering, design, product management. So the more knowledge sharing that we have, the more talent are just going to be able to see what's going on, right? Because you don't really know what's happening at companies. You hear the headlines of this startup funded, but that's as far as we're not seeing what's happening within the companies. We're not seeing the actual growth that's happening within organizations. So we definitely need more sharing, more events, more community initiatives, people to just learn from each other. And one last thing I'd like to add, for anybody here that might be interested, we also organize a software development conference. So within the same objective of upskilling talent, we're focusing on intermediate and senior talent. It's called Expand Conference. Unfortunately, 2020 COVID obviously had to put a hold on that. It was a huge success 2019, and hopefully we're going to have it in 2021. So a lot of speakers coming from abroad, kind of just bringing to the region the latest advancements and technologies in the field of software development, because I think the main challenge here, specifically for engineers, is that software development, unlike a lot of other fields, is changing at a very fast rate. It's ever evolving, but much faster than accounting, finance, like all these other sectors. So there's a lot of work to be done by corporate startups, the talent themselves, to stay on top of their game and stay on top of the latest technologies. And just that's kind of like, just to sum up what's needed to push the region forward. But it's exciting times for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lean. Pakiza, any kind of thoughts on this question, or any last thoughts that you'd kind of like to leave our audience with? You know, individuals, I'm sure we have quite a lot of people who are out there looking for work, some who already might have, but are looking to, as we said, you know, reskill themselves and get into something new, or just looking for something new and to figure out how to get into that. What are your thoughts on that? And what would you like to leave them with?
I'd definitely like to encourage them to stay positive and to look for the opportunity everywhere. COVID has put us all in our homes for the longest time ever, over like 8 or 9 months of social distancing, physical distancing. But that shouldn't have should have provided us with an opportunity to reflect, to learn, to skill and reskill ourselves with the latest trends out there, keeping an open eye and an open ear to what's going on in different communities is one, soul refreshing, that there's hope, that there's an opportunity, but also opens the door for interesting collaboration that one wouldn't have sort of thought about. And these are the kind of collaborations we aspire to keep on building. At the EDB, we bring in, we try to create opportunities of employment. So by leveraging on the localization elements and skills that are available in the country, there are a lot of opportunities that are listed on local platforms such as Majra. For example, Majra.me showcases the culture of the organization, whether it's a startup or a large company, but mostly startups, and also provides you with job opportunities. So that's sort of an employability, going back to Lean's point about the culture of companies. You need to choose where you're going to work for, because that is going to be your new home, your new family. Keep as positive as you could, and keep on learning and hustling.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time, so I'd just like to wrap up. If there are any last questions or any comments that anyone would like to make, please feel free to leave us a comment, your questions here. We'll get back to you, or reach out to us at marketingtg@tarabutgateway.com. I'd like to thank Pakiza, Lean, and Abdullah, all three of you, for your insights into this, very interesting topic. I know we have quite a lot to add. There's so much that we can go into and dive into in this topic. Is there any last comments any of you would like to make? Great. Well, thank you again for your time, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I think from my side, all I'd like to kind of put out there is for people to take a risk, take a chance, send in your applications. I've seen some great individuals who kind of hold back with the thought that, oh, it's fintech, I might not have the right knowledge or the right experience or, the right skill set. Go out there, learn, or figure out, read and research, figure out what is it that the company needs, or what is it that you might need to add to yourself. Be proactive, because as all three of the individuals touched on, culture plays a huge part nowadays in all organizations, and everyone looks for proactive individuals who are kind of out there to learn, to upskill themselves. Don't wait for somebody to ask you to do it or to push you to do it. Take that initiative yourself, and great things will definitely come your way. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in, and good luck. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. This was very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good luck, everyone. Bye.